Well, we talked a lot about China and Asia, but maybe we saved the best for last. If you ask what part of the world do we have the closest relations and most common values, it still remains the U.S. and Europe. So in that sense, we're very fortunate to have an excellent panel to discuss this. Congressman Brendan Boyle, who is serving in his fourth term as congressman from Pennsylvania's 2nd District, is on House Ways and Means and Budget, and perhaps most important, chair of the EU caucus, or, and I might add the footnote, also a graduate of the Harvard Kennedy School. Ambassador Philippe Etienne has been permanent representative of France to the European Union, as well as diplomatic advisor to the president. And we have with Ambassador Emily Haber, who has been the German ambassador here in Washington since June of 2018. It also had a distinguished career in Berlin, where she was the political director and state secretary, the first woman to hold either position. And there they will be moderated or interrogated by Nick Schifrin, who anyone who watches the news in the United States knows is a great interrogator. Nick, of course, is with PBS NewsHour and a 2-time Peabody Award winner. So welcome to the panel on U.S.-European relations.
Thank you everybody for sticking around for this last hour that'll focus on Europe. And Joe and I, thank you very much, appreciate it. Let me start at the end here and talk about something that I think has changed and shifted just in the last few days and weeks. If we held this panel just a few days ago or a few weeks ago, I would have been highlighting European frustration with the Biden administration over Trump-era tariffs that were still in effect with a December 1st deadline, the travel ban, AUKUS, of course, and resistance to some of the decisions in Afghanistan. Since then, just in the last few weeks, Afghanistan, of course, is still very difficult, but we've seen a mea culpa from the President of the United States on France and President Macron publicly saying he wants to move on. The travel ban lifts in 5 days, and there is a temporary trade pact that at least puts the Trump-era tariffs on ice. So, Ambassador Etienne, the frustration that we would have talked about a few weeks ago, has that eased?
Well, we had a good meeting between the two presidents in Rome, and the important thing is that they have adopted a joint statement, which is a strong roadmap and with a lot of common priorities. On one of them, we have already a very positive result, which is a strengthening of the US support to European actions on the side of Sahelian governments in their fight against Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Africa. And we have other considerations which are very positive because we have learned our lessons from what happened around AUKUS. In principle, on the really great importance of consulting each other between allies on subjects of importance for our security, such as arms control or nuclear doctrines. And also we have a recognition of the importance of the European and in particular French action in the Indo-Pacific. And finally, for me, the most important is a recognition that European defense is something a more robust, a more solid, a more capable, a stronger European defense is something which is good, not only for Europe, but also for the US and for the alliance, complementary to NATO, of course, with more capabilities, more aptitudes to lead operations, a stronger industrial base, and a stronger strategic partnership between the EU and NATO. So all of this is really important. And we look forward to working with the United States on these directions.
If I could ask a quick follow-up, you said we have learned our lessons. Do you believe the U.S. has learned its lesson? President Biden said, I was under the impression France had been informed long before that the deal was not going through, honest to God. Was that believable?
Well, I must underline that immediately after the announcement of AUKUS, the United States reached out. The President of the United States and the French President talked immediately 1 week after. And then we had this very thorough process during the last 6 weeks. For me, this is really important now. What I said, it's looking to the future. And of course, what the President of the United States has said has been appreciated in my country in this context.
Ambassador Haber, does the U.S. consult or inform?
The U.S. consults and informs.
Tell us more about that. I listed all of the points of frustration that especially Western European allies have had with the Biden administration. I also listed the solutions that have come in the last few days or weeks. Do you see things getting better?
Look, you listed, I believe, a number of fits and starts we've seen in the relationship over the past weeks or months. And fits and starts do happen in relationships, but they're not nearly as important as structures are. And by structures, I mean commonalities, interests, sometimes differences. And there's this wonderful word of a German philosopher. He once said that the purest form of stupidity is to forget what one really wants. And here I would note that what we really want is rooted in the knowledge and acceptance of hugely important commonalities, the structures, by which I mean security, the big challenges of our time, not only security-wise, but also transporter-wise. And in every single one of them, we know, and I think the US knows, that if we figure out a way to move forward together, we'll be stronger. And the lack of it will make us relatively or considerably weaker. So that's important, and that's what we are focusing on.
Congressman Boyle, do you acknowledge the frustrations, the word that I used before, about Afghanistan, about the difficult withdrawal, about what the President called the clumsy diplomacy on AUKUS, and do you believe that these commonalities that Ambassador Haber, well, let me ask differently, do you believe the U.S. has learned its lessons in the last few weeks and months, given those frustrations?
I don't necessarily dispute any of those individual facts, but I think we need to take a step back for a moment here, as we're only about 9 months into this administration. What a world of difference from when the ambassador first sat in my office some years ago and some of the issues we were speaking about, and what a low point we were at. To have a president of the United States on European soil saying at that point that the European Union was a plot to oppose the United States, or that NATO should not exist, or all of the sort of personal types of things, whether it was directed at Chancellor Merkel or then Prime Minister May or others. So to go to this state now, where frankly, we're having the normal sort of tensions that allies have. This happened in the case in the 1980s between Reagan and Kohl. It happened in the early 1990s between Bill Clinton and John Major when the United States first got involved in creating the Irish peace process. These sorts of things are going to happen. But I think we're in a much better place now, certainly than we were for the last previous 4 years. And we were even in a better place following the G20 summit, and I think the clearly successful meeting between the United States president and the French president. President Biden is correct. It was clumsy, sloppy, not the way to treat an ally, indeed our oldest ally, France, which is an important strategic relationship, but also with whom we have a deep emotional connection. So I think we learned our lesson certainly on that and the importance of communication, but that we will move forward in a better and more constructive place. But let's not, while we don't want to dwell on the last 4 years, let's also not pretend like they didn't happen and take a moment to recognize just what a stronger place the transatlantic relationship is today than at any point in the last 5 years.
Let's look inside of Europe and look at stability inside the EU. Of course, we're all tracking the German election. We have a French election coming in a few months. We've got a little bit of a tiff over fishing between the UK and France. We've also got very serious trends, resurgence of the far right, including in France and Germany, and pressures from the periphery. Hungary undermining democracy, Poland declaring parts of the EU constitution incompatible with Poland's constitution, Turkey almost PNGing a dozen ambassadors, and of course renewed stability or concerns over stability in the Balkans. Ambassador Etienne, is there fragility, is there fragmentation, and should we be worried about in Europe?
First, I would like to come back to what one point which you said, Congressman, and to underline what you said on after G20 and the solution which was found in G20 on international taxation. After the resolution, at least for a couple of years, of Airbus, Boeing, and now of steel aluminium. Indeed, this is really important, and one of the very positive aspects we have with this administration is the recognition of the European Union as such, as you said, as a very important interlocutor. And I say it, and I come to your question, Nick, because we will have the presidency of the European Union, like Germany 1 year ago. Now France will have the rotating presidency of the European Union at the beginning of next year. And what our presidents have discussed in Rome is also important. And then your question, Nick, is about the state of the European Union. I must say that through this COVID crisis, the European Union has become stronger because it has succeeded in finding common solutions, into extending its scope to health care policies, and most importantly, for the first time in its history, raising money as European Union for all its member states. So I understand what you say about fragmentation, extremism. That's a risk, of course. Criticisms of the European Union belong to the European Union, frankly. But we must not underestimate the real steps forward which have been made. And since you mentioned the fishing dispute between the UK and France, it is not a dispute between the UK and France. It is a dispute between the UK and the European Union, together with the Ireland Protocol, the Protocol on Ireland. It is really a negotiation to implement what has been accepted by the United Kingdom in its negotiations with the European Union.
So, Congressman, I'm going to ask you about that in 1 second, but Ambassador Haber, I want to ask you a similar question. Do you see fragility in the EU, and how do you see the departure of Angela Merkel over the next, let's say, month or two, changing any of these issues that we've been talking about inside of Europe and how it's dealt with it?
Well, I wouldn't see the departure of Chancellor Merkel as an indication or symptom of fragility or instability in Germany. You see, I thought it was indicative that during the election campaign, foreign policy really just played a marginal role. And that's not because foreign policy would be irrelevant or marginal in the German domestic conversation. We're one of the most globalized countries in the world. Foreign policy plays a huge role. But it happened because there aren't major disagreements on foreign policy. There's a very strong foreign policy, European and transatlantic mainstream in the German political debate. And when the three parties that in all likelihood will form the future coalition agreed on a communiqué, they agreed on the key tenets of our future foreign policy and our foreign policy identity, if you will, and that is a very strong transatlantic relationship, the commitment to the European Union and German responsibility in the European Union, and to NATO as not only a military alliance, but also the place where the major transatlantic conversations among allies happen. And I'll just point to one picture you may all have seen recently, when in the margins of the summit in Rome, the Chancellor met with the American President. There were 3 persons sitting around the table: the Vice Chancellor, who's going to be the future Chancellor, the Chancellor, who soon is going to be the former Chancellor, and the American President. And the subtext, the language of this imagery was, yeah, there's going to be change. But no, not so much change. In our relationship with the United States and with the American administration, there will be continuity. And we want continuity to prevail there.
Congressman, Ambassador Etienne brought it up, so let's talk about Brexit and London and what it's doing. London's threatening to withdraw unilaterally from the Northern Ireland Protocol unless the EU, frankly, caves to all of its demands. The EU just recently put forward its kind of last and best proposal, which was rejected by the United Kingdom. So is Boris Johnson...
Rejected 3 hours before it was even announced by the European Union.
There you go. Is Boris Johnson playing with fire, and what should he know about a possible U.S. trade deal if he is?
Yeah, so first, I mean, for those who might not follow the issue carefully, one of the reasons why the Good Friday or Belfast Agreement was able to work was because the United Kingdom, as well as the Republic of Ireland, had joint membership within the European Union. It was quite obvious, though it was rarely brought up during the Brexit debate in the run-up to June of 2016, that if the UK were to withdraw from the European Union, suddenly we had a border issue. And it would have to go somewhere. It would either have to go at all of the various crossings, more than 300 crossings, in a big stretch on the island of Ireland, or the checks would have to take place in the sea. That was made quite clear by former Presidents Tony Blair and John Major when they went about campaigning quite passionately to point this out, though unfortunately it got very little attention at the time in the Brexit debate. Since Brexit happened in June of 2016, and that's the vote by 52 to 48 of a sovereign people, it's their decision, and they have that right to do that, and they have now withdrawn from the European Union. But in doing so, we must preserve the Good Friday Agreement. Now, the Northern Ireland Protocol, which has been negotiated, agreed to, and signed by this Boris Johnson government, indeed passed by an overwhelming majority by this conservative government, I think more than 500 votes in the House of Commons. So to then turn around and say that the agreement that you just negotiated, passed through Parliament, won a general election on, that you almost unilaterally, or almost immediately are turning around and unilaterally threatening to tear it up, it's no wonder why people question whether or not you're operating in good faith. And so the European Union has been remarkably reasonable and calm and patient throughout this. They know, I think they know by now, they have the full support of the United States, a bipartisan group of us on Congress led by Speaker Pelosi.
And the President.
And I was getting to that. And the President of the United States, who mentioned it sitting in the Oval Office as close to Boris Johnson as I am to you. This is a bipartisan issue in the United States. And to the final point, when you asked, is Boris Johnson playing with fire? When you stoke up these sort of animosities and divisions that have been around for so long, and that fortunately we've been able to see relative calm and peace for over the last 2+ decades, once you stir up and inflame those passions, they are very hard to control and very easy to get out of control.
And what's the message there on a possible U.S.-UK trade deal?
Whether it is the Speaker of the House, whether it is the President of the United States, whether it's a bipartisan group of us on Capitol Hill, there can be and will be no U.S.-UK free trade agreement if the Northern Ireland Protocol is ripped up and the Good Friday Agreement is violated, period.
We have about 6 or 7 minutes left, so I'm going to try and get through one more round, but we'll see what we do. I want to talk about European strategic autonomy and U.S. nuclear policy. Recently, multiple NATO ministers during the nuclear planning group meeting raised concerns about the U.S. considering no first use or sole purpose declaration. That sole purpose declaration on nuclear weapons is what candidate Biden supported. I've heard from other European officials worried about this as well. The administration's nuclear posture review is due in 2 months. Ambassador Etienne, what is your government worried about, and how does this affect how you think about European strategic autonomy?
Obviously, this is a very important review of a very important policy on the side of our ally, American ally, and it is obviously being looked at very closely by all allies of the United States, and maybe also by other powers. So we
adversaries as well.
And this is the reason why I mentioned explicitly in my first answer to your question nuclear doctrines as something which, like arms control, must be considered obviously as a priority for consultations, including and in particular in NATO.
Ambassador Haber, is there a sense of European sovereignty? You don't entirely agree with the French on how you talk about it, but is there a sense that you see going forward on how European sovereignty works with the Biden administration, given that we have overcome some of these frustrations in the past?
I'm not aware of differences that I would have with my colleague Philippe Etienne on European sovereignty. As I see it, European sovereignty is a strategic asset in and for the transatlantic relationship, because it will mean that Europeans will not necessarily be inclined to turn to either American decision-making or American resources when resolving security issues in our geography, in our neighborhood. So strategic sovereignty is part and parcel of security in the transatlantic framework, a strategic asset for both of us, for Europeans and Americans alike.
Congressman Boyle, you're a member of the U.S. group of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. Do you think European sovereignty threatens NATO?
Oh, no, not at all. I welcome the moves that we are seeing in terms of a European military capability. Had a large group of members of the European Parliament on Capitol Hill the last couple of days and met with more than 20 of them between yesterday and today, and voiced that very clearly. I think it complements the NATO mission. President Trump would always bring up the 2% issue to NATO, and he would do it in a very bombastic way, which was not helpful. But I would point out that on substance, he was saying actually the same thing President Obama was saying as well, that getting our friends and allies within NATO who aren't meeting that 2% commitment to do so. That's not the only measure of one's commitment. There are others, such as this European Defense Group that would be outside NATO. But all of them are incredibly important, because as it is right now, if something were to happen, say, in the Baltic states, we already see what has happened in Georgia and Ukraine. If something were to happen in the Baltic states, I have real questions about our collective ability to be able to meet that moment. And this is something that, in my view, as an American, I feel strongly that anything and everything our European friends can do to further enhance their defense capabilities is to the best of all of us.
It's an excellent segue to Lithuanians, who we have next. But I have 2.5 minutes, so I will allow a question or two. I think this gentleman on the right side.
Thank you so much. I have a question related to strategic autonomy. One of the big watershed moments, with European attitudes towards the U.S. was when the U.S. exited the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or Iran nuclear deal, in 2018. And that's an issue that I work on in London at the European Leadership Network. And I wanted to ask, now that we know that negotiations are going to resume on the 29th of November, as of about an hour ago, why is this an issue that has been so important to France and Germany and also the wider European community? And where do you see this file in particular moving forward? Thank you.
Do you each want to just have a quick answer on that?
Well, it has been, this file since the very beginning, I think 2003, has been really taken in charge by Germany, the United Kingdom, and France. And the European countries have always led the effort, now together with the European Union as such, to ensure that Iran will not acquire a nuclear bomb, and to reach this goal through a negotiation. So it's quite normal then when the previous administration has withdrawn from the JCPOA, which we have really regretted and criticized. The Europeans have also led all possible efforts to keep this negotiation possible and to make it again possible as soon as possible, which the new administration has made itself a goal.
Ambassador Haber?
Well, nothing really to add, because I totally agree. I would add one point. It's our neighborhood, it's our geography. It affects directly our security as well. That was the point of departure, why, in fact, it was the Europeans that took the initiative in leading the negotiation process back in 2003.
Ambassadors, Congressman, we are right on time. So thank you very much, Delbert, and thank you very much to all of you.